All right. So we are on. And what we are going to be discussing today is we're going to be up to chapter 3. So we started off as a recap. We spoke about the idea that we always thought that we have one soul and we have different tendencies. So you have the positive stuff when you're going in one direction, you feel all godly and inspired and excited and okay, we're going to do this. And then you have the other type where it's like, okay, I'm going to deal with physical stuff. I'm not interested in being too holy. I want to do my regular stuff, or sometimes even, the story of the guy who came out of Russia and he comes to Israel and they see there's 3 pairs of gold teeth. And they're like, why do you need this? It's like, well, one of them is for dairy and one of them is for meat. They're like, and the third one? Once in a while I go to McDonald's. So that's the idea that we have when we're talking about, different tendencies of what we call. The Alter Rebbe said, no, that's an incorrect way of looking at it. We do not have different tendencies. What we do have is 2 different souls. And so what we're trying to work out is we're trying to get more info on what the soul is, how the soul functions. And that's what Tanya is going to speak about. We all want to have a relationship with Hashem. That's what we all want to do. The thing is, though, that we need the proper tools in order to be able to connect with Hashem. And how are we supposed to do that? So we're going to sort of do an intro, and then we'll get into the chapter. The intro is basically, if I want to give out, there are 2 different concepts in life, the way we can deal with something. There's called in Kabbalah, it's called seichel and midas. It's called intellect and emotions. And there are 2 ways that I can give over a piece of information. I can explain it to you, and I'm very intellectual, and you're very intellectual, and you'll get it. The other way is if I want to be a good teacher, right? What does a good teacher do? Give you the experience. A good author captivates you, pulls you into the story, makes you feel as if you're part of the story. When you walk out of that book, you're like, oh, wow. But you feel like you just can't, you, so to speak, live that thing. That's the difference between intellect and emotions. That intellect, you'll understand it. Emotions will also help you understand it, but you get a little bit further when it comes to that. So when we're talking about intellect and emotions, right? So it's sort of, you can say that intellect is objective and emotions is subjective. For example, I was speaking to someone recently. He was telling me about dealing with a legal challenge. And so he was explaining to me the whole situation with this and what the lawyer said and what they did, the whole story. And to me, it was like, okay, I wonder, it's interesting. I'm trying to put everything together. For him, it was very different. When he was saying certain words, he was tearing up and, voices breaking, sort of like crying over certain words, for example, sentencing and stuff like that. Whereas for me, I didn't. Why would that be? For me, it's sort of like a case study. I'm just trying to find out, well, how does things work like this and like that, helping him, okay, if the lawyer said this, maybe ask the lawyer this question, ask him that question, to try and help him navigate. He was trying to find a way to exonerate himself. And so for him, like, if I'm learning, I can, open a Gemara, I'm going to study something really, really complex. And then it hits lunchtime, I close the Gemara, I go to eat lunch. Why? Because it's theoretical. It's not personal. I personally, I love information and I love knowing how things work. Not just in a Jewish or rabbinic way, but just in general. And medical, I like hearing how medical stuff works as well. But when I was dealing, being my brother's advocate, all of a sudden it became very much heavier, because now it's like, okay, I'm asking you a medical question, not because I'm curious, but it makes a major difference. What steps are we going to take now? So that's the difference, as unfortunately, all too well. You're in the medical field all the time. But when now it's like, okay, this is a relative of mine, all of a sudden it's a whole different thing. And so when we have this idea, this is sort of the difference between seichel and midas, between intellect and emotions. We have as you know, there's the three Chachma ben Adas, and there's the three intellectual capacities, and then there's the seven emotional. Interestingly, the Alter Rebbe explains it in this chapter. He says the three mothers, and we'll explain why he says mothers or parent. There's the three mothers and the seven doubles. When he speaks about the emotions, he speaks about the doubles. Hello. Why does he say doubles? Because when we're talking about emotions in the intellect, it's only one thing, and this is the way it is. It's objective. Emotions, once it becomes subjective, now there's the two sides, because there's the objective thing and subjective thing, right? So the good thing about feelings is that it becomes personal, and I'm going to internalize it, and it's going to be great when I have something that's emotional. The downside of emotions is that it's subjective. And so what happens is that because emotions are a reflection of myself, they're not a reflection of truth. Emotions are a reflection of myself. And only if you're studying for the pure sake of studying of Hashem's Torah can you say that you're studying for the sake of truth. And that's the only way. You can have the same situation happened, and you look at two different newspapers. The headlines are different. The way they write the story is different. We can even say the way they skew the story to fit their narrative is different. It's the same story that happened. You can't argue with the facts. The fact is X, Y, and Z happened. There's pictures of it. There's video of it. Now, how do you portray it to your readership? That depends who your readership is and where you want to go. So intellectually, it doesn't change. Emotionally, it could. You know, there's the story of, I've said it recently on Shabbos, where this guy comes to the rabbi, and his friend owes him $5. His friend says, I don't. So they come to the rabbi and ask the rabbi, well, what do we do? And the rabbi says, what, unfortunately, you're wrong and he's right. You owe him the $5. And he gets all upset and he starts screaming, Rabbi, you're wrong. You don't know what you're talking about. How could you be like this? And the rabbi says, 1 second. Last week, you're the butcher. Last week you came to me with a question about the cow, if it's kosher or not. And I told you that it wasn't kosher because it wasn't. And you lost hundreds of dollars, but you didn't scream at me. You said, okay, and you moved on. Over here, it's $5, but you're all upset at me. The difference is, over here, it's emotional. Here, the issue isn't the ruling. The issue isn't the $5. It's that he won and you lost. So sometimes that's the downside to emotions, is that it becomes so personal that it becomes subjective, and I'm skewing what it is into the wrong way. There's a famous Hasidic story of the farmer back in the day, where he was a little bit illiterate, and he didn't know how to read. And one day he gets a letter from Moscow, from the big city, and he has a look and can't read it. He sees his name on the front cover, on the envelope, but he can't read it. So he goes to the village, the town's wise man, and he goes to him and says, you know how to read. Could you read this for me, please? And the guy reads it for him, and he says, it says, dear so-and-so, it's your uncle, and I got to tell you that unfortunately your father has passed away. And the farmer hears this. He drops to the floor. He's in a faint. They try and revive him. He's wailing and screaming, and there's a bystander who's looking and says, 1 second, I don't get this. The guy who read it, the wise man, he knows, he understood it. He can put everything there. He knows exactly what's going on. He didn't collapse. But the guy who doesn't know what's going on and doesn't understand it exactly, he did. Why is that? Well, you know the reason. Because for the wise man, it was intellectual. It was theoretical. And for the farmer, even though he's illiterate and doesn't understand it, he felt it. It's personal. So that's the idea that sort of, the mind lets us discover the truth. And our feelings show us how to personalize them. So, because without the mind, we could never reach to where we are. With all the advancements that we have nowadays, with all the discoveries that we have, we would never been able to reach that just with the mind. Right? We could never reach it without the mind. but it's only the heart that's going to make it real. Or another good line on this same topic is the mind finds the truth and the heart makes it relevant. Mm-hmm. And so they go hand in hand. Intellect is outside of you. Emotion is the way it's inside of you. So in this chapter, we're going to discuss how this works. This process is going to enable us to be able to have a connection with the infinity. And it's these tools which help us create that ability. And so in this chapter, the Alter Rebbe, even though the Alter Rebbe speaks about the two general modalities of which is intellect and emotion, he's going to focus in this chapter on the intellect concept. And later on, there'll be more about this. And in general, these chapters sort of are intertwined. We'll mention something today. We'll mention it in 2 months from now, and then we'll mention it again. And then it's because ultimately it is part of one big massive picture. Now, talking about intellect. So we've all been involved in an educational learning process, or even writing, where you're trying to get it, and it doesn't work. I'm sitting there, I'm learning, I come across a question, and it's like, okay, I'm trying. It's just not going, right? Or what do they say? Where do authors live?
In a bottle.
They live on writer's block. And they're stuck. It just doesn't go. And I have this article. I have a deadline. It's just not going. All of a sudden, you're in the shower, or you're eating breakfast, or talking about something totally different. Whereas people who daven often, you're in the middle of the Amida, and all of a sudden you have a flash of light. Oh, that's it. You got it. And sometimes you'll be talking to someone, and you're in the middle of a conversation. Like, oh, I got it. And they're like, what? You're like, whatever. Not that I don't want to tell it to you because I'm interrupting what we're in the middle of. I can't explain it. I got it. I know it. Everything's there, but I can't put it into words. There was a great sage, Rava, who was giving a class, and he taught a halacha. And a student got up and said, 1 second, how could you say that if this, and that? And he stopped for a moment. And he said, I can't explain it to you right now, but I'm sticking to my guns. In Chachma, he got it. That's Chachma. Chachma is that flash, that concept. It's the seminal seed of concept that I have the idea, but I cannot put it into words yet. It has everything. So I know I'm right. I in my mind, I see the process. I can't explain it to you right now. Later I'll explain it to you, but for right now, trust me on this. But this is a real type of that. So that's a concept of Chachma. It's that Barak HaMavrik, as it says in the Tanya, it's that flash of lightning. And then over time, you start putting it together. You start to flesh it out. You start, now you can finish off that article or the Torah concept or everything else that you work on. That's the concept of Bina. So there are 3 intellectual capacities. The first one, we said that flash is Chachma, and fleshing it out is Bina. There's a third one, Das, which we'll get to. The author brings that at the end of the chapter, and we'll get to that soon. But now we're going to talk about a little bit, let's zoom out a little bit, right? So we have 10 faculties, as I said, and these 10 faculties, these mirror the 10 godly attributes with which he created the world. We're like, what do you mean 10 faculties? I can go list a whole bunch of them. The Kabbalah says there's 10. Where do we see the 10? The 10 is, it bounces back from the creation of the world. In fact, interestingly, it says that the sweetness, so to speak, the sweetness of an apple comes from chesed. The heat of fire comes from gevura. So the sweetness of an apple comes from God's kindness, and that causes all the sweet stuff in this world. Things which are like heat or strength, how would I say, strength, strong, aggressive, intense is a good word. Those things come from the concept of gevura, of severity, of the strictness of that attribute. So everything comes, and our souls, and it's not just our souls, but everything physical in this world, it doesn't evolve, it devolves from Hashem's attributes. So we have Hashem. Hashem was around before the world was created. Hashem always existed. Hashem has his 10 attributes. From that devolves the creation of the world. From that devolves the creation of man, which is what are our attributes. So our attributes mirror, but also devolve from Hashem's attributes. And therefore, according to Kabbalah, it speaks about this 10 attributes. 3 of them are, and it's split into two groups. It's called mothers and children. Mothers are the 3 faculties or the attributes of Chachma, Bina, Das. Chachma, Bina, Das, we'll talk about that in a moment. But that's, Chachma, Bina, Das is concept, comprehension, and connection. 3 C's. Concept, comprehension, connection, which connection is basically application. We just spoke about Chachma and Bina. We said Chachma is that flash, Bina is taking that and sort of fleshing it out, understanding it better, and then Das is now, okay, what do I do with this? Let's make this practical. So, and that's, people know, like, well, where are we now? Right now we're at Chabad. What is Chabad? So Chabad is the Chachma Bina Das. So when you say, well, what is Chabad? Oh, Chabad is, conception, comprehension, and connection. You're like, what on earth are you talking about, Rabbi? I thought religious guys were weird, but I mean, this is like, you're taking a cake on this one. How do we connect to Hashem? And this chapter, we're going to understand by the end of this chapter why we're called Chabad. Because Chabad is the idea of not having an emotional connection with Hashem, having an intellectual connection with Hashem, which causes an emotional connection. It starts off intellectual, which creates emotion. And by the end of the chapter, by the end of today's class, you'll understand what I'm talking about. So for now, trust me on this. Mm-hmm. So then you have what's called the Shivas Yemei HaBinyan, the 7 days of creation, which are the children. You have the kindness, the severity, etc. And the parent faculties are intellectual, the 3 faculties of the mind, then the 7 emotional attributes of the heart, faculties of the heart, that's the children. Why do we say parents and children? The reason we say parents and children is because emotions are born from our thoughts and our intellect. And this is what I mentioned to you, that I think you would appreciate this concept that we're going to talk about tonight. That emotions come from our thoughts and our intellect, from Chachma, Bina, Das, that creates our emotions. Chachma is the native intelligence that we have. That's the ability to understand an idea, to get excited about an idea. That comes from Chachma. Bina is the soul's ability to develop the idea, to research the idea, to expand on the idea. And that is Bina, which is going to expound on what we got from Chachma. So Bina really is sort of the real mother that fleshes out the idea that Chachma initiated and inspired. And that's why Chachma is considered a masculine energy and Bina is a feminine energy. Just like on a physical way, the man gives the seed and the woman over the 9 months takes that drop and expounds on it. And then at the end of 9 months, now you have a child. So that's the same idea as Chachma and Bina in the intellectual perspective.
Can you define those 2 words again?
Chachma and Bina. Chachma is concept. Bina is comprehension. Chachma is the flash. It's the idea. When you get an idea, like, I got it at 1 second. Okay, that's I have it all here, but I can't tell you what I have because I don't get it right perfectly. Bina,
It's like a dream.
It's
where it seems so clear in your mind, but then when you try and speak it out, you realize that.
Right, you could say like that, or it's more of a concept of an idea.
Yeah.
You have a problem that you're trying to work on, right? I'll give you an example. Right, you're coding, and you come across the thing. You're like, okay, I have this challenge, and this is not working. I got to fix this. You're thinking about, all of a sudden, you're like, okay, I got it. At that moment, you cannot tell me the code because you got it, the idea, but you haven't yet formulated what the exact code is going to be. You have the general concept of it.
That's not how it works for me. I'm sorry. That's
Okay.
a bad example. Genuinely, if I think for coding, it's all math based. So I'm trying to get X to equal 12. And I'm just like, and then already it's X plus 6. How do I get to the equal 12? I don't think, wait a minute, I'll add a number to it. I think, oh my God, I add 6.
Okay,
There we go, and then I just gotta write it down, so I do have that's
so
what
I stand corrected in my coding abilities.
I was saying, it is, yeah.
Okay, but in general, okay, so we'll look for other examples. But the idea is very often we have an idea that we get it, but we don't get it good enough. And then we have to work on it, and then it's like, okay, I got it.
I do think I understand that, and you have like a concept idea of like, you know, let's say that it's too dusty in here. And so you have the idea is that you should remove the dust. And then the execution is to get a
Right.
air purifier.
Yeah, or you have, yeah, but that's sort of like sort of.
Well, give me an example of the dustiness in the room. That's something that you had to solve.
That's too simple of an equation,
Okay.
I think. There's what's a good example? I thought the coding was a good example, but it's not.
Something that you had to solve, something that you had dealt with your life recently.
When I'm when you encounter problems, it works better. Because I have a problem I need to work out a solution for.
You have a problem right now, which is to try and explain this.
Correct.
So the problem, yeah, you
But,
know,
okay.
you have the idea, concept in your head, you just have to explain it, and that's.
I have to explain it, and that's the thing. I can't explain it right now.
Yeah.
But he knows by the time we get to the chapter, we'll get there. That's the Bina.
That's
You
why
have-
it's so
when you-
hard
okay.
for me when I'm-
Okay, you have it. You have a manager. You have a manager.
I do wanna say, just one thing is, you know, I told you it's so hard for me when I have a programming idea not to write it down on Shabbos. And I told you how I struggled and learned to like,
Right, but why do you need to write it down?
huh?
Why do you need to write it down?
Well, the reason why it's so hard not to write it down is because when I have the concept in my head, it's this fully formed equation that works. I'm
Okay,
like, I know how to solve this equation, and by the time I wait a day, I'm like, I don't remember I just had only the conception that I had an idea that actually worked. It's
okay,
nice.
and
Yeah,
we'll get to that at the end of the chapter also, which is how do you get the concept to be a way that you're going to remember it and not forget it.
right,
And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Big companies hire project managers.
right,
Project managers very often they do troubleshooting. And so there's a problem. You go to the guy, you're like, okay, I'm trying to do X, Y, Z. It's not working. He's like, okay, I have an idea. Like, give me a second. I'm going to formulate my idea and I'll tell it to you. In a second, in an instant, if he's good at his job, in a second, he has the idea. But it's more of a general concept. He doesn't have it in a way that he can just give it to you. He thinks he needs to formulate the words and then send it out. That's the idea of Chachma and Bina. And so Bina is, so we said, so Chachma is like that beginning part. It's the seed, the conceptual idea. And then you have Bina, which is where you flesh it out more. And so if we're going to think about what we know about Hashem's greatness, then we can sort of have these 3 different levels. Mamala kol almin, Seiv kol almin, and Kula kamei kol chashiv. Those are the 3 Hebrew terminologies, or partially Aramaic, aleph-based letter terminologies that the Alter Rebbe uses, and from Kabbalah, and then I'll explain it right now in English. Okay, we can contemplate about 3 different ways of Hashem. That Hashem fills the universe, that Hashem transcends the universe, and the fact that creation is very insignificant to Hashem. So the idea of filling the universe, Hashem fills the universe. We think about that. We think about the idea that a soul fills the body. We think about the fact that a teacher wants to give over something to a student. The teacher has to adapt himself to the student. Even though the teacher is greater, the teacher will adapt himself and change his thought process or the way he's giving it over in order to bring it down to the level of the child. That's the idea of Hashem filling the universe. Hashem, that's Mamali Kol Almin, where Hashem fills all the worlds. Soivev Kol Almin is more of a it's where Hashem transcends the world. It's more surrounding, where because Hashem is bigger than his creation. So therefore, Hashem is connected to the world, but Hashem is on a higher level, not involved in every little, not that level of Hashem is more general than specific. So like an employer and employee relationship, right? With a teacher and a student. So the teacher is lowering himself because I need to explain to my student every single thing that I'm trying to give over. When an employee says, hey, I need you to call Bob and tell him this and call John and arrange that and make it meet. And then your job is not to say, well, why do you want to call Bob? You know, maybe you should call John and he does a much better job. And it's like, you want to stay hired? Right? You don't understand why to a lot of the stuff you're being told. You do have a connection with the boss, but it's not as the same connection as a teacher student would have. That's the idea of mamali, involved or transcendent. On a physical way, we could say there's two life forces in our body. There's the fact that I can move my fingers. That would be that there's a life force and energy that goes into my fingers with the nerves and everything, and it's telling everything, and it's all working. Then you can have somebody who, God forbid, is paralyzed. Their hand is still alive. If it wasn't, it would be amputated. So the hand is still alive, but it's more of a general life force as that's keeping it alive as opposed to the specific where it's able to move. Then we have a higher level. Then we have the level where we think about the fact that creation is so insignificant to Hashem, it sort of doesn't exist at all in Hashem's presence. So how do we find a physical connection to this? It's a little harder to find a physical analogy, but we would say, if you're in the presence of greatness, let's say, you feel you're in the presence of the Rebbe. At that moment, nothing exists besides the greatness. Even I don't exist. The greatness is all that exists, and everything else sort of doesn't exist right now. That would be this third idea of Hashem, where it's Hashem not just, involved in the world, not surrounding the world, but on a much higher level, that sort of the world doesn't exist on such a level. And when we consider these three greatnesses, the first thing the heart will respond to is the concept of fear or awe of Hashem. You're like, wowed. And I'm talking about not when we're just saying it now, but when we actually really meditate and contemplate on this thing. And then with further contemplation, then the heart's going to respond with a feeling of love and a yearning to get closer to Hashem. And this comes from the mental faculties. As they are connected to Hashem, so too do the emotions. And this helps us understand three different verses in Tehillim. The Alter Rebbe quotes these three different verses. One of them is the idea where it says, King David writes, I yearn for my soul is sort of totally enamored and yearning to Lachatzos Hashem, in the courtyard of Hashem. Then it's another verse says, my soul thirsts for Hashem, for Elokim, Tzama Nafshi Le'Elokim. And there's a third verse which says, my soul thirsts and yearns for you. So we have courtyard for Elokim, and then just the word you, which doesn't come with a name of Hashem. And we've explained previously that the different names of Hashem represent different faculties and different elements of different, what's the right word? Facets or midos.
Aspects?
Attributes. Different attributes of Hashem. So, Elokim is going to be more connected with, like if you look in the Siddur, you see there's different names of it, and you're like, well, why is it like this? Because each one represents a different style of Hashem. Elokim is more Hashem connected in nature, and Gevura. Then you have Havai, which is more Yud Kei Vav, which is more higher than nature. You have the word Kael, Aleph Lamed, which is more the idea of strength, which is also the idea of Gevura, but the idea of strength. You have the Shin Daled Yud, which is that the concept of Hashem, which has the ability and to do whatever it is that needs to be done. So the different names represent different stuff. So over here we have the courtyard of Hashem, the Elokim of Hashem, and just you with no name. You, your essence, is much deeper than your name. Your name is for the people around you. You, in essence of the word you, is the whole you, not a specific part of you. So if we understand that everything in this world is basically an expression of Hashem's godliness, right? Then that creates the expression of thirst towards Hashem. But if we contemplate on the facts, right? So that's if everything in the world is an expression of Hashem's godliness, that's the mamali where Hashem is involved in every piece, that creates that thirst towards Hashem. If we contemplate on the fact that Hashem transcends the world, that he is the origin of the world, but still much greater than the world, then that's the verse that says, my soul yearns for Elokim. Elokim is the creation of the world. Bereshis bara Elokim. So this thirst is for the part of Hashem that isn't part of creation of the world. So therefore your thirst is also for something that transcends the world. But if I contemplate on the complete insignificance of the world, the way it is in God's presence, that is going to induce the third kind of thirst. And that is tzama lecha nafshi. My soul yearns for you, for God himself. Not any particular name or attribute of Hashem, but to Hashem himself. And this is why the Alter Rebbe quotes all three different verses that describe the yearning, because it's all different levels. The general idea is, through contemplation, I yearn for Hashem. Which part of Hashem am I yearning for? That depends on how deep my contemplation is in my meditation. Is it just that Hashem is in every little thing of the world? That would be I yearn for the courtyard of Hashem, that everything that exists is for Hashem. If we're saying Elokim, that's more that, the whole world, not everything specific, just the general. And then you have the tzama lecha, that I just want Hashem. So we spoke before, and that you have chachma, right? Chachma brings to bina. What we just explained is the idea, because we spoke about intellect and emotion. What we just said is that intellect will lead to emotion. And when we understand this different stuff and we contemplate on it, that will lead us to emotions. Now, the Alter Rebbe is going to focus on the third mental capacity, faculty, right? So we said that chachma, which is the concept, that's the native intelligence of the soul. That's the part of the soul that discovers an idea, that grasps an idea. That's chachma. Bina, which we said was comprehension. And the bina, that's the part of the brain that develops an idea. It gives it structure. It gives the idea depth. And then we have the concept of das. Das, we said, was connection. Das is the strong attachment to the subject that we're trying to understand and to grasp. Now, we said before that we have sort of the parent-child effect. So if chachma, that concept, that's father, bina, comprehension, that's mother, what's das? What is this connection part? So Alter Rebbe explains that if we only have chachma and bina, not das, then the emotion that's going to be generated is only going to be a fleeting emotion. It's not going to have it's not going to be a viable emotion. It's not going to last. Because without the das, without that strong connection of the mind to the idea, the emotion will not be a lasting one. So what do we have? What do we need? We need das. And what das does is that provides the stability and the permanence in the emotion, without which it would just be shallow and fleeting. So what das means is that when the mind not only understands the idea, but also identifies with the idea, takes the idea personally, connects with the idea, that's das. So to give an example, you have someone who's a really, really smart man, and he makes a really wise comment. And he's like, I just want to tell you, so-and-so said that, what happened? So that's not das, because he's still quoting somebody else. He has this something brilliant, an intellectual concept. He learned it. He understands it enough that he's able to even give it over, right? It's not just that I get it, but it's too deep. As a teacher, I've learned that there's two ways to ask a question. And you have to always ask two questions. You always have to ask two questions. When you ask the kids, you don't ask, there are two ways to ask a question. Either you could say, who understands what I just said? Half the class, 3/4 of the class are going to put up their hand. But that's not the right question to ask. The right question to ask is, who understands it enough to explain it or to repeat it back? And then you have much less. Now I know I need to repeat this because I don't have everyone with me. They have the chachma. They might have bina. I'm not sure. Probably not. Because here's a good example for you. If you understand something that you understand it, but not enough to spit it back or to teach somebody else, you don't really understand it. So chachma would be
Yeah.
that I got it. Yeah, can you tell it to me? Not yet. Give me a minute. Let me formulate it, and then I can spit it back. That would be the bina.
Right. Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I can see where you're coming from because the whole point of programming is having to explain things to the computer. So, you have the thing that you want to explain to them, and then it's figuring out how to explain it to the computer so they understand.
Yeah. So when you have, right, someone's so I'm quoting something, yeah? It's a great idea. It's not my idea. It's something that impressed me really much. And so therefore I'm going to give it over to you, but it's still not mine. Das is going to be that I process it to the point that I internalize this idea. It became part of me. It's no longer sounds like I'm quoting, but it's as if it's part of me. If I'm just quoting, right? So that's the chachma and the bina part. Eventually I'll forget it because it's not part of me. Das, now you connect and you identify with this idea. And now you're not going to forget it because why? It's not a memory. It's you, which is why Das is often referred to as oneness. For example, the Torah says, V'ha'adam yada es chava. And Adam knew Eve. In the biblical concept of knowing, Adam knew Eve and she became pregnant. So this Das, this knowing, Adam knew Eve, this is the becoming one, which is described in the Torah as Das. This is a type of a mental connection that makes you one with the subject that you're studying. And what's the result of this Das? The result is that the emotions that are born out of this study will also have permanence. Because it's going to be you. It's not just a feeling that went through you, a feeling that went past you, that you had once upon a time, but now it's gone. No. It's because if it just goes through me, it's not a true emotion because it doesn't last, right? Truth exists forever. So there's another way to describe this is that you'll have kids that can have a lot of chachma, right? They're brilliant. They can expound on an idea. They can even flesh it out. They can understand its ramifications, right? Which is bina. But they're very immature and irresponsible. Das would be the mature part of the mind, which usually is going to come with age. Once you have Das, the idea that you understand has been internalized, and now you have permanently changed. Right? Different people could have different strengths in this. Some people could be more chachma people, some people more bina, some people more Das. So I'm some people are really good at ideas. Horrible at implementation. And some people are great at implementation, but no creativity at all. But whatever you tell me, I'll do it good. So you can have chachma, you can have bina, and so chachma and bina is really good. I'll understand the idea. Maybe I can have both. I'll understand the idea. I'll even be able to execute it. But if I don't have das, right, that's the maturity, the idea, the ability to think this concept through really properly. What's going to end up is I'm going to end up as a TikTok video.
What do you mean?
And Scott's got to be watching, stupid mistakes that guys make. Because if I have the idea, right, I know the idea, but I didn't think it through. I didn't sort of really go through it fully and properly. Then there's going to be stuff that I'm missing because I didn't really, I didn't do a dry run or think about all the, I'm making fire and I have this whole beautiful fire thing and it works. And I made sure that, that it's not going to backfire and what have you. What I didn't realize is that wherever I'm shooting it at is dry grass. And we're talking right now, we have the Santa Ana winds, right? So you can have, right? The gender was the San Bernardino, was it last year, 2 years ago, right? The gender reveal party. It was all nice and fun until that firework, right? They had the chachma, they had the idea. They may even have the bina. They knew what they wanted. They didn't have the das. They didn't run through it. And then they had the problem and we had a lot of damage. How long did that fire burn for? Right? Weeks, I think.
You don't have das, have a big fire extinguisher.
There we go. Therapy is great. Actually, somebody recently posted, he wrote, has anyone ever been helped with therapy? Like it actually helped you change and helped you in your issues. So the results are, you know, what people wrote is irrelevant, or what is it Dr. Laura would say? I don't know if she's still in the air or not, but no.
What?
She moved to Sirius XM, and then I don't know,
Oh, okay.
at some point. But people are like, I've been going to therapy for years and it hasn't helped me. And it's just like, well, you have a bad therapist. Go to somebody else. So therapy is only good if it's gonna, you know, there's a chachma and bin, it's all nice. If I don't have das, therapy is useless. If I can't implement your ideas are useless to me because it's staying as a concept. It's not being brought into action. And that's why, like, you read, you know, the Rebbe's Sicha, so you hear the Farbrengens that the Rebbe gave. The Rebbe would always end off with, and therefore what? I just gave you a nice, beautiful intellectual exercise. We had a wonderful time here talking intellect. Practically now, what's next? What are we supposed to do with this? And in Hasidic terminology, we call it the bechein, the and therefore. That everything's nice and good. We can have a nice, wonderful conversation. And therefore what? Conversation needs to lead to action, to a purpose. Now, action doesn't mean going to do something. It can also mean changing certain ways I think, certain ways I talk, certain ways, you know, my outlook on life, on certain things. It doesn't mean that I have to go and actively create or do a new project or a new thing. It's also good enough if my thought process changes. That's also good, right? So, but there always needs to be some useful change. Otherwise, it's useless. You know what it is? Somebody said, you know, my rabbi speech is like those things flying over New Jersey. Just drones on and on and on. So,
Hopefully we don't shoot you down.
right. So while all of this is going on in their head, all this intellect, it will affect the heart. And it will affect the heart proportionately with what's going on in the brain. And this is the part where we're getting a little bit more practical. If the brain is excited with chachma, then with this intellect, then I'm going to have an emotion that's bright and then an emotion that's exciting, but it's going to be fleeting if it's just concept. If my brain's excited with bina, with the comprehension, so I have a more developed emotion, a more complex emotion, but it's still not permanent. But if my mind focuses on das, then the emotion from it will be internalized and be permanent. And then we're going to be changed for the better. Will we always be changed for the better? Well, right now we're talking about the godly soul. So hopefully if we're talking about the godly soul, it should be for the better. If we're talking about the animal soul or the natural soul, whatever. But we're focusing on the godly soul for now. So what we see over here is that the emotions that are born out of intelligence in the godly soul, what are they? They are going to be the fear or the awe of Hashem and the love of Hashem. Now, there are 5 other, and we said there are 7 emotions. We only just spoke now about love and awe. And the Alter Rebbe in this chapter doesn't go through all 7. He says love and its branches, awe and its branches. Because love and awe are the main 2 emotions, all the other ones are just permutations or mixes of these 2. So we mentioned in chapter 1 that the element of fire produces arrogance and anger, right? Because these are emotions that rise. It flares up. But over here, when we're talking about and we're describing the emotions of the godly soul, the Alter Rebbe is going to explain that the desire that we feel to get closer to Hashem comes from the fire element. In the animal soul, it produces anger. In the godly soul, it produces a thirst. A thirsting or a yearning for that which you love doesn't come from love itself, because love is pleasant. Love is not intense. Thirsting comes from the element of fire, because just like the flame, which is trying to get away, it's trying to rise and get away from the wick, that yearning or that desire to be elsewhere produces this thirsting in the godly soul. The water of the godly soul produces a more pleasant type of love. So what is the difference with these 2 loves? Love, like water, is when you already feel close. It's when you enjoy the closeness. It's a more calm, it's a more pleasant love, more sort of like the love of a brother and sister or a parent and child. Where over there, the closest always was, right? You're the same flesh and blood, you're the same family, and there's this love, but it's more of it's calmer. The love of siblings is more pleasant, calmer, more steady type of love than there is in than some other types of love, than the fiery love. And the love of the siblings that we're talking about over here, interruptions or family, interruptions don't enhance the relationship. Whereas the fiery love, which is more of a yearning or more of a thirsting type of concept, that describes a love between a husband and a wife or between a bride and a groom, because their closeness is not a given and they're overcoming a distance, right? You have, they're from different planets, right? Men are from, women are not from. So, so
Some of us aren't even the same solar system.
there you go.
No.
We'll do counseling after.
Is it working?
After. So this love is going to be a fiery love, which is intensified by the distance that separates them. The love that siblings have with each other is too calm of a love for spouses. It's more of a passive type of love. But the fire and intense love of spouses, that's not for siblings either. So there's different types of love for different relationships. So when we're talking about the love of us to Hashem, which is the concept of love of a father and a child, and the reason why I'm saying father and not mother is because, as we spoke about Chachma and Bina, in Kabbalah, a giver is male, and just same way it is biologically, the giver is male and the receiver is female. So we're talking about Hashem giving to us. Hashem would be referred to Hashem in a masculine concept, and us as a receiver would be a feminine. So that's a type of love where we feel that Hashem is always close to us, was always there, is always available, right? That we are a chelek halakah, we're a part of Hashem. So that part of our soul experiences a love of water which flows calmly, uninterrupted. But then you also have the relationship that we have with Hashem as the creator-creation relationship, where we're naturally distant from each other. Hashem is so great and we are so opposite. And I don't want to say so low. But that, what happens over here? So we overcome that difference. Just like a husband and a wife, in overcoming that distance, we attain a love that's more intense, a love which is more fiery than the love of a parent and a child. And that's the love like fire. So what's the love like fire? Love like fire is a feeling that I want, that what I want and what I love is distant from me. So what happens to that love? That love turns into a yearning. That love turns into a thirst. What does thirst mean? That what I want, what I need is unavailable, right? I need water and I don't have it here. So I thirst. Okay. We're good. But when we have an understanding of Hashem's greatness, that creates a fiery love. Because when we're thinking about the greatness of Hashem, what are we focusing on? We're focusing on the distance that there is between us. Hashem is infinite, we're finite. Hashem is forever, we're temporary. Hashem is true, and we fake it, and maybe sometimes make it. Hashem is holy, only purely holy, and we're maybe not so much. So what happens is we become more and more aware that Hashem, who is the source of our life, is distant from our lives. Cares about us, is very concerned about us, but distant nonetheless. And this distance or this difference causes us to yearn and thirst for a closeness that we do not have. On the other hand, when we contemplate on Hashem's kindness, how close Hashem is, how involved Hashem is, how there is no place devoid of Him, that every single thing in existence and the existence of the world is a reflection of Hashem's presence and a reflection of Hashem's influence, the emotion born out of that understanding will be a more pleasant and calm love. Because we're not trying to reach across a distance or to get something that is unavailable or unachievable, but we're comfortable with the closeness that exists with Hashem's presence and availability for us at every time. And that is the parent-child kind of love, which is a steady love and a pleasant one. So there are two ways of love. There's the fiery love, the passionate love, which is more creates a thirst And that's when we think about Hashem is so great and so far away. And we're like, I want you, but I can't get to you. And then we have the part of Hashem, the love, where we know Hashem is close to us and connected to us. And that will be this closer, that gives that calm. Right? When you want to think about Hashem, if you want to be calm, right? People are that just relax. Cast your throw all your worries to Hashem, and He'll take care of you. This type of concept, if I want to calm myself down because there's so many things going on and I can't handle the situations that I'm in, I need to be calm. And thinking about how great Hashem is and how awesome Hashem is so great and so transcendent is not going to create that love. That's going to create, I don't want to use the word stress, but that's going to create a more of a thirsting, a yearning, a constant challenge or desire that is not calm. It's I need to get there, I need to get there, I need to get there. There's this big challenge. How am I going to get to that next step? So at that point, at the time when we want to have that calm love, that's the idea when we think about Hashem, how close Hashem is, we're with Hashem, Hashem is taking care of us. And at different times, different types of meditations are appropriate. You can't constantly be in this stress, or you can't handle it with a fiery love. You can't constantly be in this calm, water-like love, because then you're not going to be propelled to do anything. Because kumbaya, everything's lovely, everything goes, everything's good. Why should I do something if Hashem loves me? And somebody just asked me that this past week. If everyone says, Hashem loves me, it doesn't matter what I do, then why do I need to do? And the answer is, just because Hashem loves you, no matter what you do, which is the concept of a parent and a child. It doesn't matter what you do. The parent is always your parent and the child is always your child. At the same time, there's this other relationship that we want to have with Hashem. And that's that fiery yearning relationship. And to bring that closer, that's going to be when we do stuff. Mm-hmm. And so, which is why, based on this, we just explained the difference between the water love or the calm love or the steady and pleasant one, which you said is more of a parent-child. And we said the love in a husband and wife, that fiery love over there in such a situation, absence will make the heart grow fonder. Why? Because when do you yearn for something more? When it's distant or when it's unavailable. So the yearning type of love is intensified by distance. But the father-child type of love is not intensified by absence or distance, and it actually causes pain when you're away from your family. Whether it's a parent-child or a sibling or something, it causes pain, not yearning, because it's a different type of love that we're trying to get through. So what do we see over here? We see that in the function of the soul, we have the three intellectual faculties. And those three intellectual faculties, they are the parent faculties, and that's what gives birth to a proportionate and complementary kind of emotion. Thought creates emotion. And when we have all these three faculties of Chabad, Chachma, concept, Bina, comprehension, Das, connection, and when it's focused on one subject, then the emotion born from that understanding is going to be a deep emotion, it's going to be a lasting emotion, and it's going to be a true emotion. There are a couple of stories that I skipped out about why it's so important to have Das and not to and Chachma and Bina is not good enough. One of them is my childhood pediatrician, a doctor, right? So he knows about everything, but he was a chain smoker. And I remember walking into his office as a kid. Now, I moved out of that city when I was 10. So I was a child, but I remember you walk into the waiting room and it stunk of smoke. Oh. So here you have a doctor he reads all the medical journals. And what is he doing? He's smoking. Or you have a dentist who's explaining to you about the problems of sugar and how it's really bad for cavities are really bad. And you need to brush your teeth. And if you have too much stuff, then it's going to be bad for your teeth. And what's he doing while he's doing it? Chewing gum or sucking on a candy. It's like, there's a disconnect over here.
When you finish with your teeth cleaning, he gives you candy for being so well behaved.
There you go.
Yeah.
There was actually a dentist in LA. I don't think he does it anymore. I don't know if he's in practice anymore, but he would give a $5 gift card to Munchies, to the candy store. Usually I have a prize box. He would give you $5. It's like, What does Jackie Mason say? You can never read a prescription. You know what the doctor's writing to the pharmacist. I made my money. Go make yours. So it's like, I need you to come back to me. Go buy some candy. Right? Or there was a big philosopher, and he was caught doing something inappropriate. And they said to him, how can you do this? It's very inappropriate. You teach philosophy and morals. He said, I also teach geometry. Am I a circle? Just because I teach something, it doesn't mean. Or we have a thief. It says that a thief, while he's standing at the doorway, about to pick the lock and break into somebody's house, what does he say? He says, Hashem, please make me successful. Are you serious? You're about to transgress what Hashem tells you to do, and you're asking Hashem, make me successful. There's a disconnect. And that's why you need das, and chachma and bina is not good enough. All my knowledge, all my theoretical studies that I can understand, and I can understand it well enough to explain it to everybody, and I can be the best lecturer in the entire state or the country. But if I don't have das, if I don't bring that down, if I don't anchor that, I am not going to change. There's a story of the chassid who's traveling back in Russia, and is walking, trudging along, and somebody drives by and says, hey, I'm going the same direction. You want to ride? He says, sure. He says, sit in the back. Sits in the back, and there's barrels of vodka. And he's sitting there, and it's out there in Russia, and it's cold, and he pulls his jacket tighter. And as he gets to his destination, they sit down, and they're out of Fabrengen, and he says, guys, I got to tell you something amazing. Tells them this story. He says, you know what I realized? You could be surrounded with barrels and barrels of vodka, but if you don't internalize it, it's useless. The idea is we need to internalize. And that's what the Alter Rebbe is saying over here. That we want to connect. We're going to have a lot of meditations that we're going to take. But we cannot just leave these as theoretical meditations. We need to bring this down. We need to anchor it into das, which das is the way I'm going to bring it into practicality. And that is the idea that's going to enable me to go into the next thing. What do I want? Ultimately, what I want is that my intellect should create emotions. I have certain emotions that I want, as we said, the love of Hashem, the awe of Hashem. How do I get to that? Is by contemplating on the greatness of Hashem. But it's only going to last. You have New Year's resolutions don't last because it's not based on das. You didn't anchor it. And when we anchor it, these emotions are going to be lasting. This intellect will be lasting, which will create the emotions. So now that we understand what das is, we understand the intellectual makeup of the soul. And the intellectual makeup of the soul leads us to the emotions. We need to know what are the emotions and how do they fit in the puzzle. And for that, you're going to have to come back around chapter 40. So summertime, we'll get to that. But for next class, we're going to say, okay, so now we understand the intellectual capacities of the soul, but how does the soul express itself to the outside? And that's what we're going to talk about next week. Sorry, that's what we're going to talk about next class. Next week is Hanukkah.
What day is Hanukkah start?
Hanukkah, I believe, starts Wednesday night.
Wednesday night.
And so
So the 26th is the first day.
we can have a look at the calendar.
The calendar's right up there. I don't.
Just before we go to that, are there any questions, comments, concerns? Whether how the soul expresses itself.
What's going on for Hanukkah?
All right. So it seems like
Sorry.
everyone understood everything that's going on.
Yeah.
It's been wonderful being with all of you, whether you are here in person or you're online.